Good afternoon everybody, apologies for not being here tonight. I hope you can all see and hear me from the back. I think Joe's comment earlier about Hill's definition of globalisation of production, I think could be simplified and perhaps expanded on a bit more by looking at Janet Morrison's description of this. What she said is that companies, put simply, have the ability to locate the different stages of production, and that's stages of production, to the most advantageous location. These different stages of production can be seen as forming a value chain, from the sourcing of materials through to distribution and delivery to consumers. So what we're saying here is that it's not just about the production element of manufacturing in one place, it's about the value chain. So we might have research and development and accounting facilities in one country, we could have raw materials coming from 2 or 3 other countries, we could have sub-assembly and manufacturing in a 4th country, and then we could have a distribution team or logistics team globally linking all these sites up, being able to reduce economies of scale and efficiencies in every element of this value chain. So each element of the chain adds value to the process. So I can demonstrate this here. If we look at the UK being research and development, and then we take raw materials from, say, India, Japan, Germany, their raw materials, and then we outsource the production to China and assembly. Then what happens then is distribution partners and logistics teams link these up. So intellectual property information comes from the UK into the production process. Products go to China through logistics teams and distribution companies, and then the raw material and then the finished products leave China and go to the consumers. Each one of these raw material facilities is the best place to get those products. China is a low-cost economy with the most efficient production plants, and the UK has got the ability and experience to be able to manage and produce the technical ability to make these products. All these people in partnership form a value chain. Globalisation of production is not a new concept. Although it's increased exponentially over the last 50 or 60 years, it's got its origins in trade theory. So, going back into the probably 18th century, trade theory was the mercantilistic view, which essentially says that governments define their wealth by the amount of gold they've got in their reserves. So what a government tried to do was sell more products than they bought in order to give them a net positive in gold reserves. Now what the economist Adam Smith postulated was in 1776 that wealth actually comes not from the amount of gold you have in your reserve, but from the products and services available to your citizens. And that different countries can produce some goods more efficiently than others. So as a result of that, why is it that the consumers would want to pay more to buy domestically when they can go and buy products cheaper abroad? So he came up with a theory of absolute advantage. Now, the definition of absolute advantage is the ability of a country to produce more goods or services than the competition, using the same resources but more efficiently in the production process. He also said that if trade is unrestricted, then countries can specialise in products and services to give them a competitive advantage over the competition. Now what that meant is there were several benefits of working this process. Countries could enter trade at the most cost-effective price, meaning the consumer got savings. Workforce became more skilled because as they produced these products and specialised in these products, they got better at what they were doing. Production time was reduced and efficiencies increased through repetition. You were no longer changing what you were doing from one day to the next, so there was no downtime, and the people were getting quicker at doing what they were doing. Most importantly, technology improves. We're not talking about just the technology involved in producing that particular product, but more importantly, we're talking about the technologies involved in transport, in communication and machinery. And it's these 3 elements that form the foundation of the modern day globalisation as we know it today. He also went on to say that the countries would decide their specialism based on 2 factors. Natural advantage being climate, populace, natural materials, an acquired advantage being technology, machinery and skill set. And this is still true today. It's no secret that as the global economy moves on, production's being offshored to some of these emerging markets like China, India, Russia. And they've got an abundance of populace, an abundance of raw materials. And perhaps it's more so true to say that the acquired advantage, in probably the UK being the first post-industrial economy, that they're specialising in training and upskilling their workforce, bringing in brains from outside to try and improve science, mathematics, engineering, in order to keep a competitive advantage in the research and development field. This theory of absolute advantage, however, is potentially a little bit naive in the actual real world. It assumes that every country will have its niche and it will produce one product or service better than anybody else. Now, in actuality, countries will actually produce maybe more than one product or service more efficiently than other countries. So, the English economist David Ricardo postulated in 1817 that comparative advantage, which is his theory, is the ability to produce a good or service at a lower opportunity cost. Opportunity cost being the relationship between scarcity and choice. So what he's saying is that global efficiency gains can be made from countries specialising in products and services that they can make more efficiently, even though naturally other countries can make these more efficient. And what we mean here on a basic term is that if you've got a small village and one person is the best doctor and also the best administrator, it's more efficient for that doctor, or you get better returns for that doctor treating people 24/7 than it does between him splitting his time between administration work and treatment work. So even though this doctor is, or this particular person is the best doctor and best administrator, his time is better served treating people. You then bring the next best administrator in and put them in that role. So even though they're not the best administrator, they're the best person efficiently to take that job on, because remember, your doctor is best, the other person is best placed being a doctor. So if you extrapolate that further and look at in country terms, if we suggested that the US and Mexico, for example, both produce wheat and cocoa, the US can produce wheat and cocoa far better than Mexico. However, the US makes greater returns on wheat. So it's in the US's interest if they just they focus all their manufacturing on wheat and allow Mexico to produce cocoa. They trade with Mexico on favourable terms above everybody else, so they get a discount on that, and Mexico gets the benefits of being able to globalise their production of cocoa. So it's a symbiotic union, which is a win-win situation. So, the evolution of production from theory into practice. Trade alliances were formed since the 18th century, 19th century, in things like the East India Trading Company, bringing raw materials and products from the New World into the Old World. By the 1950s, deepening trade links, cross-border investment was a necessity, born out of the Second World War, the end of the Second World War. There was a scarcity of skilled workforce killed in action, lack of raw material, food, resources, that meant that countries were forced to work together, whereas pre-1950 or pre-war, there'd been a significant amount of protectionism and countries trying to protect their own economies. Additionally to this, the World Trade Organization was formed in the 1950s, which went on to try and their sole aim was to try and improve and develop intercontinental relationships, inter-country relationships. From the 60s and 70s, the electronics industry began setting up offshore manufacturing in the Far East, and today Japan is still the major producer and controller of electronic components. And they were the very first to start to globalise production. The late 80s onwards saw the beginning of the telecommunications era and transport improvements to networks. Now this is probably the beginning of how we know globalisation of production today. Essentially the world became a smaller place as companies were able to use media, the internet, mobile phones, mobile technology to communicate daily. Transport between countries and indeed now continents were in a matter of hours rather than days. And as a consequence, as economies evolve and companies then seek to gain a competitive advantage,